everyone. Welcome to High Strangeness. Happy Saturday. Hey, Vision Null. Thanks for being here tonight. And thanks to everybody who understood my sudden disappearance. And thank you to everybody who reached out regarding last week. Yeah, I totally scheduled it. I thought I was free, but my sister's getting married and last Sunday was her bridal shower. And I thought my Saturday night would be free, but I guess, I forgot as the maid of honor, I kind of needed to be around doing things the night before. And so thank you so much to Hexn00b for being understanding about that last minute cancellation. But again, thank you guys to everyone who reached out. Hey, Ada, thanks for being here tonight. So tonight we have an interesting show. I am so excited because when it comes to Sasquatch, Bigfoot, skunk ape, I've always been curious, but I never knew much about the phenomenon. And I got to know Hexn00b through my other show, Adapt or Get Wrecked. He came on and we spoke about his art and we had a good time. And then he told me after the fact that he is a Sasquatch enthusiast. And so my mind was completely blown with what he's doing with his Sasquatch investigating and enthusing. And so I said, let's get you on a High Strangeness stream, let's talk about it. And then he told me, he's like, I have a friend, Trey, who is SquatchMeNow on Instagram. I think some of you guys may follow him, and who is another enthusiast. And so when I heard that, I'm like, okay, Sasquatch night, I am all in. So I just want to welcome Hexn00b and Trey to the show right now. Hey guys,
Hello.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I am, like I said, I keep saying I'm excited because I am, because, for me, like UFOs and that type of stuff, that's always been a part of my life. But, this side of it, the cryptid side, has always has intrigued me, but I never knew enough about how to research it, how to find out more, what's real and what isn't. It just always seemed so confusing to me. But it was funny because before I went to college, I was like, is there a cryptozoology major? So I've always been intrigued. So yes, so thanks guys for being here tonight to discuss this with me. So I'm going to start. I'm going to go clockwise. So Hexn00b, we've streamed before on Adapt or Get Wrecked, and then I remember after the fact, you told me that you were a Sasquatch enthusiast, but besides being an enthusiast, that you were also a hunter of Sasquatch, a tracker. What is the politically correct term?
I like to go out and try to find evidence, and I've actually got some pretty interesting finds when I was out there in the field. And Sasquatch, I'll speak for myself and probably for Trey too. Neither of us are Sasquatch experts. There's no such thing as a Sasquatch expert. We don't know anything about them, and we're just going to use the word Sasquatch and Bigfoot interchangeably while we're talking tonight, if we happen to do that. But, the interesting thing is, and I'll tell a brief story about how I got into Bigfoot or Sasquatch, if you'd like to hear.
Oh, sure. Yes, I would love to hear that.
Okay. Well, growing up, of course, we all had the Mysteries of the Unknown books and In Search of Leonard Nimoy. We all saw the Gimlin Patterson footage, the famous footage of the Bigfoot walking across. Yeah. And, it always was interesting to me, but I was never into Bigfoot. I was like, yeah, it's a nice folklore fairy tale. I had no belief in it whatsoever. But then I actually had an encounter by happenstance. And ever since then, I've been obsessed with Bigfoot. So there you go.
Oh, okay, interesting. All right, yeah. I mean, I guess how does one have an encounter and not decide to? I mean, that would be my action. I wouldn't go the other way. I would be running towards it in every way I can, research everything. So, well, thank you for sharing that. Okay, I was curious, what got you into it. And so, Trey, you are the man who runs SquatchMeNow, which I saw you have a big following and you have a lot going on there. So can you tell me a little bit about what SquatchMeNow is and how you got into Sasquatch research?
Sure. So I actually had a UFO encounter as a young kid, and that
Ooh.
sort of opened my mind to all of that. And like Danny said, In Search of, Monster Quest, all those great shows, really, piques your interest in that kind of stuff. I had a strong interest in paleontology and archaeology and anthropology and all that kind of stuff as a kid. So when I decided, I work in social media and marketing and that kind of stuff now. I used to work in film. And so I decided I wanted to create a social media presence around the subject of something paranormal. And for me, Sasquatch was really pretty grounded. And we have fossil evidence of creatures that are somewhat similar to what's described today. So I wanted to start there, sort of in investigating that sort of thing. And I really think it's a great catalyst for lots of other paranormal subjects and all kinds of subjects, from, human origins to quantum physics. You can really get into a lot of different things through Bigfoot. So that's how I started it. And then, so I created SquatchMeNow as just sort of to begin as a curation of just all the evidence that's out there. And there's quite a bit, and it goes back pretty far, all the way up to modern sightings and videos and photos that come out today. So I just wanted to create that and create a space for people to talk about it and discuss it, hopefully through polite discourse, though it doesn't always go that way. So I have an Instagram, a Facebook, a YouTube. The TikTok is pushing around 400,000 followers. And Danny, actually, a video Danny sent me has almost 4 million views on the TikTok. So it's going pretty well. And I'm working on a documentary series about the subject. So it was a great way to create sort of a base following for that when that eventually comes out.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. And I'm curious, your UFO encounter. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've actually never told this publicly, but sure, I'll do it.
Oh, thank you.
So I was about 9 years old. I had a bedroom that was on the front of this sort of ranch style house with this really long frontage to the home, big long front yard. And and it was a dead end road out in the country, out in the middle of nowhere. It's actually on the 33rd parallel, which is actually the parallel that most UFO sightings occur on. So at least in the United States. So at night, as a little kid, when because there was only so many houses on this dead end road, when a car would come by, lights would flash in that window of mine on the front of the house, and I would crawl down to the end of my bed to see who was coming through, who was coming by the house, because I had friends that lived down the street, and it was just like a little weird thing I did. So one night I'm laying in bed, and these bright lights flash into my room, and I'm crawling down to the end of the bed to see whose headlights are going by, and I don't see a car. And usually I could always get to the end of the bed because it was such a long frontage. I could always get to the end of the bed and see whose car it was, but there was no car there. So I'm looking across the street, and there's these really tall pines. And as I follow these tall pines up with my eyes, I start to notice that they're fanned out like this, right? Which is really weird. They almost look like they're blowing in the wind, but they're not moving, and they're fanned out. It's almost like a plate that's smushed down. And so I keep looking up above that, and there's this big dark disc, dark colored disc, and on the bottom of the disc is a light, and then there's a sort of a reddish light going around the edge of the disc. So I just kind of stared at that for a minute, and like a lot of people talk about, it just zipped off. It was gone. So I run see where my parents are in the living room. There's a big wall that blocks the whole front of the house where they were sitting in the living room. So they didn't get any of that light or anything coming into the house. And of course, you saw a helicopter or whatever. Clearly it was not a helicopter. It almost looked like, if you can imagine Star Trek, the next generation, just the big circular part of the ship. It's almost what it looked like. And so, that was the whole sighting. It wasn't that long. But a few days later at church, I run up to a neighbor and ask him, being a little kid, I run up, hey, did you see anything in the sky that night? And he's like this very serious, stoic old country dude. And he actually ended up saying that he did. He was out fishing like in the middle of the night, and he saw something very similar in the sky, which this is not a BS kind of guy. This is a guy that's going to tell you the truth. So it was interesting to get, as a little kid, to get an adult confirmation, especially from someone of that character.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. No, and totally, like, because I feel like whenever people do see sightings, it's so rare to find somebody else in the same area who have seen it. So it's like, because, and especially, your parents saying, no, it's something else, and you being like,
Right.
no,
Nah,
absolutely not.
yeah.
And having that, adult
So
confirmation.
it almost looked like there was some sort of electromagnetic field or something coming off of the ship, because it wasn't like laying on the trees, but there was some sort of force coming off of this thing that was pushing those trees down like that. Like there was just this big flat object that had been sitting on him, except for there was space between the trees and the ship. So it was a crazy thing. So that really opened my eyes to the possibility of lots of different things. And I just love the idea of Sasquatch, because it's, like I said, the fossil record is extremely limited, but even within that limit, there's so much evidence of lots of different types of creatures that existed at one time. We know now in early human history, there were, it was a planet of the apes practically. There were so many hominids and other primates and all these different things living all at the same time. And we know now they were interbreeding. And then if you look at Native American history, they talk, all indigenous cultures all over the world talk about that interbreeding, predation, all of this kind of thing. So I just love the subject. I think there's a lot of basis to it. There's a lot of evidence historically. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And that's something I wanted to ask you guys about. That was like one of the biggest things on my mind, because it's interesting that you said, having this UFO sighting, led you into Bigfoot, and you're like, okay, maybe Bigfoot could be a little more tangible. I could look at fossil evidence. I could look at all different things. But I've heard, I've heard a few different perspectives on Bigfoot. I've heard, that it's actually a physical creature, who we do have physical evidence of it, that leaves things behind, leaves footprints behind. But then there's other people that come from this other school of thought that are like, okay, well, no, it's an interdimensional creature. I think Creatures from the Outer Edge presents this old book. It presents the idea of, no, they're actually dimension hopping, and that's why it's hard to actually get them on camera, because they're interdimensional creatures and they're coming in and out of portals and stuff. So like, all these different perspectives. Like, do people, first of all, do people fight? Like you were mentioning that some people can get a little angry and hostile. Do you guys see like a lot of like, a lot of headbutting between those two factions, or are people usually a blend of their two? Is it possible to be a blend of the two?
Well, I'll say this. I don't really interact with the Bigfoot community a lot. I'm just kind of out there like a lone wolf doing my thing. Um, but I understand there are different factions of people who believe there's some sort of mythical or magical creature. I'm more in the animal camp.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe, just like if we look at the cuttlefish or other animals, some animals have amazing abilities we don't quite understand. And even with Sasquatch being able to use infrasound and other, what some people would call supernatural abilities, well, tigers can use it, whales can use it, crocodiles can use it. These are known animals that do have what some people would consider, almost paranormal like abilities. So it's I don't personally subscribe to the magical creature kind of like side of the Bigfoot realm, but who knows? They might be right. I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just a dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody
Based
that
on what
tells you they do know doesn't know. I
Yes.
wouldn't trust anyone that tells you that they know the answers to these questions. But I tend to agree with Hexn00b that I think there's a famous quote. I can't remember. It was a science fiction writer, maybe Asimov. I'm not sure, but someone that said that magic is just science we don't understand yet. And I really think I really take that perspective. And something I think about a lot is, and you can apply this to all kinds of other hominids that, let's say, maybe survived to today and kept evolving. What would humans have been? What would we have become if we had not crutched on civilization? What would we? How would we have evolved? Because we would have had to evolve, and probably would have evolved a lot quicker if we hadn't crutched on civilization. So, in 2019, the CIA released documents in regards to evidence of telepathy. Now, telepathy is something that's talked about in terms of it's called mind speak in the Bigfoot community. So if you have creatures that are hunting and need to be quiet, and have continue to evolve for 2 million more years, could they have developed that more than we have, because we've been crutching on civilization and writing? And another aspect of that is that a lot of Bigfoot sightings say that they don't see sclera in the eye, so the whites of the eyes, they don't see whites of the eyes. Well, the sclera are part of our vocal communication as humans. It's part of how we communicate. It helps us to communicate vocally. But if these creatures are communicating telepathically, they don't need whites in their eyes. It wouldn't have developed that way. There's all kinds of adaptations that would have occurred with these creatures that might look like magic to us, but are actually just evolutionary adaptations.
That's interesting. I've never thought of that perspective. Like, what if they are more advanced than us? They just don't necessarily, live in the same civilizations and everything.
It's a different type of advancement. Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
yeah.
Like, as we're masters of technology, they're masters of the forest. And I saw somebody comment that they're apex predators. They can hear you a mile away. Yes, absolutely. And it's my belief that if you happen to encounter one, it's because they want you to have the encounter. They chose to make themselves known.
I honestly think they're typically distracting you from others in their pod, if you will, or there's others around, and they're probably putting out a decoy, if you will, first. So everybody look over here at this guy, while the other ones run the other way.
Yeah, I believe they're never alone. Yeah.
I was about to ask, so meaning they're not solitary creatures. They live in community.
I don't think so. No. Oh, yeah. They're pack hunters, so they're going to be several with them, and they're going to be carrying offspring,
Yeah.
Now,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You guys go ahead. I was just,
Well, I believe that, they also might make use of cave systems and everything else to stay out of sight, and they're so fast and they're so agile. They're absolutely incredible creatures, and I'm sure we've all seen the video of the chimps in front of the screen and how quickly the chimps can memorize data. You know what I'm talking about? So you for people who don't know, they did a study with chimpanzees where they flashed random numbers between 1 and 10 on different parts of the screen, and within a couple milliseconds, the chimps could visually memorize exactly where it's going. And they theorize that in the primate brain, that time is viewed much slower than it is for humans. So by the time that they see us, recognize us as being there, we're completely oblivious to their presence as of yet. It's just fascinating to think about. It's amazing. And
this is interesting. It's blowing my mind because it's changing my perspective on Bigfoot. I never, like I said, I never took it to that level. I always kind of assumed that they were solitary creatures. So when it comes to evidence, like photographic evidence, video evidence, or even eyewitness evidence, I know a lot of the time, it just happens to be that one Bigfoot. Is that the singular version? One Bigfoot? Is that what I would say? Or one? Yeah. What is, I feel like, what would be the proper term for one Bigfoot alone, first of all? Just a Bigfoot?
Yeah, it's a Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot is both plural and singular.
Oh, it is. Okay. That was throwing me off a second. So, typically from what I've seen, always like the evidence is just one Bigfoot. But has there ever been any photographic evidence or video evidence of like a pack of Bigfoot around?
Certainly pairs carrying offspring. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I'm sorry if that was a dumb question. I'm just,
No.
I'm starting to put these things together. And you had mentioned Hexn00b, the cave system I think it was either you or Trey. One of you guys mentioned the fact that they might live in cave systems. And it's interesting because I know that there's an overlay map of where humans disappear. And, a lot of humans tend to disappear near cave systems. And some people would argue, well, that's because they wander in and they get lost or they get stuck in a cave or whatever. But is there a possibility that, let's say Bigfoot does happen to live in caves, do they prey on humans?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, that's what the Native American or indigenous people have said forever, is that they prey on humans. I mean, that's where you get the idea of giants eating people, trolls eating people, all that kind of stuff. And actually on SquatchMeNow on the Instagram, I have a couple of posts where I show several maps that show white-tailed deer populations, Bigfoot sightings, caves, all correlating with the cave systems, missing people. You can put all that together, and I mean, it certainly is interesting. There's a lot of correlations, but even if you look at the legend of Sul'Kulu, which was anglicized as Judaculla, in that legend from the Cherokee, they talk about Sul'Kulu and his people lived in caves. So there's a few different caves in North Carolina that were where he supposedly dwelled. So there's a lot of evidence for caves, and we've explored a tiny percentage of inner Earth, if you will, if you're looking at cave systems. So we don't know what's in there. There's whole ecosystems.
And even if you look at, the inhabited parts of North America is still the wild, wild west. It's still the wilderness. If you've ever done a cross-country road trip, you drive for hours and hours and hours without anything there. And it's not like you have to go deep in the woods to find them. It's not like you have to go into the middle of nowhere to encounter them. I can go 15 minutes from where I'm living right now and find evidence.
Another sort of paranormal woo aspect of the Bigfoot phenomenon that you could apply science to, and the cave theory, is that we have bacteria in our eye, right? We have microorganisms in our eyes. Well, a lot of evidence of microorganisms that are bioluminescent in caves. So eye shine or glowing eyes is commonly reported with Bigfoot. So perhaps they've adapted and brought in some sort of symbiotic relationship those sort of microorganisms into their eyes, and that applies. That accounts for their glowing eyes that people.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting to think about. And don't get confused, Ashley. They're, in my opinion, they're monsters. They're not cuddly and fun and nice and happy creatures. They're hyper intelligent. They're as intelligent, if not more intelligent than we are. So it's not like
that was my next question. Okay, they are.
But people go missing all the time. If you read into David Paulides and Missing 411 and all those cases, not to mention that all the time in the middle and deserted highways, there's cars found where people called for help, and then people show up to tow them, they're just gone. Where do these people go? What happens to them? There's all manner of creatures out there. And some that are even much bigger and worse than Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I think we're dealing with a lot of different types. You're looking at regionalized adaptations of a variety of hominids and hominids that lived at one time, and then they've bred with humans, they've bred with other hominids, they've bred with other hominins, bred with other primates, and they've created a vast. That's what we see in witness reports. They look different. They're smaller here, they're bigger there. Even Bergman's law about larger animals and smaller animals based on climate and sort of the hemisphere they're in. You see smaller Bigfoot in the south, much larger up in Alaska and Canada. So there's a lot of science that really backs, accepted science that backs the witness sightings and witness reports. If you dig it all up, you look at all of it, it makes a lot of sense.
And I love this. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ash. I love this.
Go. You guys are touching on every time I'm about to ask a question. You guys are already on it before I even ask, because that was my next thing about variety of Bigfoot. And I do want to hop back to that in a moment. But I'm sorry, what were you saying, Hexn00b, before I cut you off so rudely?
Well, no, you didn't cut me off. I was about to say, there's apparently 5 different types. Is that right, Trey? 5 different types here in North America?
I think there could probably be a lot more, but yeah, I think there's, they talk about 5 or 6 different types in the US alone. And if you look at total types worldwide, they correlate with sort of early hominid, same number of sort of early hominid fossils that we have.
Absolutely. They're incredible creatures, and it depends. If you go down to the south, like in Texas, they tend to be, averaging, maybe 6 to 7 feet tall, much leaner, more like a basketball build. The one I encountered in the Pacific Northwest was huge, which your atypical, when people think of Bigfoot, that would be Bigfoot. And even out here where I am in the Midwest, they get pretty large too. So it's you from region to region, wherever you go, you can go across the United States, and I've gone to pretty much every state except for the plain states up in the extreme north and the East Coast. I've pretty much gone everywhere else and looked for them. So
And so my question with that is, I know that there's differences in the names for different parts, like skunk ape and so do these names also correspond to the different varieties too? Like, I think Mr. Okel had mentioned that he heard some of them actually do smell like skunk. So is that, does the naming kind of coordinate with the changes in just their physical appearance?
the indigenous people have hundreds of different names
Mhm.
for them, depending on the tribes, and they have their own folklore that goes along with them also. Um, there's a great podcast out there if anybody's interested in tuning in called Sasquatch Chronicles, hosted by Wes Kermer. Hey, Wes, awesome. And he has people on from all over the country who give their accounts of what happened with them. And so if you really dive in, and there's like 870 episodes now currently, where you can go in there and hear stories, and you can find lots of differences but lots of similarities from when you're listening to these people's stories. So definitely, if you're more interested in that, check out that podcast. It's the best out there.
And what was the name of the podcast again?
Sasquatch Chronicles.
Sasquatch Chronicles. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And look what Michael Parks. Sorry to interrupt, but what Michael Parks has said there. He was talking to his cousin from Maryland this week, and he saw something similar. He's not going back in the woods at night again, not by himself. And I think that Trey and I agree on this, that we don't know what's out there, but it's important to understand that there is something out there. There is definitely something out there we don't understand. And why is it being covered up? That's another big question too we can dive into later.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, we are led to believe that the most dangerous thing that's out there, when you go into the woods, is going to be the people. Like, we don't have to worry about the people. Coyotes are scared of you. These are scared of you. But apparently, according to what you guys are saying, that we should be taking caution anytime we're out in wooded areas, in the forest at night. These are things we have to take into consideration, apparently, because this is across the entire U.S. It's across the whole world. And I guess when we look at disappearances in national parks, maybe that does come from that mindset where we're taught, like, it's all good as long as you have bear spray, as long as you scare the coyote away with some noise, then it's all good. But it's interesting, like you said, the fact that this is being covered up. We're not taught, to be cautious of whatever else might lurk. That's like kind of considered old-fashioned superstitious thinking, to think that something else could be in the woods. So
that's silly. I mean, you have hogs that are much more likely to get messed up by a hog. At least where I live, I'm down in the South, and I mean, you stumble upon a hog and her babies, you're in big trouble. I mean, they will mess you up. So you should be carrying a gun if you're out there with some kind. I mean, people, hogs, those kind of things. Snakes. That's probably much more likely to get you than a Bigfoot. But something is certainly grabbing people, and it's. I mean, like he said, there's lots of different things that are out there. There's not just Bigfoot, but
yeah. And I guess
it's
also
paranormal.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know what? And I guess I'm also from New York. So those are the main things. And we're not really allowed to carry guns here, so it is I have my limited New York perspective of things and of the dangers in the woods.
Well, they're definitely up there. I mean, I would be careful in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, the way the city is looking right now, I know, go in there. So and I guess that leads me to Yeti. So when people talk about Yeti, is that also another one of these varieties according to the area they live in, or is a Yeti something completely different?
Well, again, it's probably
Yeti, the abominable snowman, the white one.
Well, most Yetis, first of all, aren't white. That's just like sort of a pop culture thing.
Okay.
Because of the abominable snowman name. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's just a genetic variation from Nepal, Tibet.
Okay, so we're still
Russia,
talking
parts of Russia, that kind of area. But it's we're all talking about the same sort of phenomenon, but we're talking about a lot of genetic variation, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Okay. No, thank you for answering that because that popped into my head. I'm like, okay, so now, so that just, yeah, comes back down to variations. Oh, so I just wanted to pop to a question over here. So Mr. Okel says, the famous Squatch footage that you guys had referred to earlier. Do you guys believe that that's authentic or that that there was something else happening there or, I mean, I know the phenomenon is real, but that specific footage, that famous one, we all know. What do you guys make of it?
You go first, Hex.
All right. Well, I would assume you're talking about the Patterson Gimlin film. I would
Yes.
say that's 100% authentic, 100%. Not only did we not have the technology to make something like that back then and that realistic, but it has not been debunked, and it's been what, 50 plus years,
and it hasn't been replicated either.
And it hasn't been replicated. But let's also not forget about the Air Force captain with the Minnesota Iceman either. Right. That's a big deal too. Which also has a strange cover up attached to it. But I would say that footage, and I would say that's absolutely real. Trey?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing. I mean, again, my early part of my career was in film production, and I've worked in makeup effects and all kinds of stuff. And certainly in the 60s, they couldn't do anything close to that. If you look at Planet of the Apes, I mean, they were covering most of the body with clothing. They could have never made it look realistic. If you look at any movies from that time frame, you're looking at very silly, cheesy looking stuff, the loose, baggy, look. The musculature of that creature is extremely convincing. They'll do some math and tell you that, it was only 6 feet tall, so it could have been a man in a suit, but at the same time, it couldn't have been because you couldn't have created a suit like that at the time. And it was a female, so females are going to be a little bit smaller likely, and it could have been a young female. So, I mean, a lot of people on my page all the time, I get, it's too small, or that's not the right shaped foot, or whatever. There's so much. Not only are we talking about genetic diversity, but you're talking about a creature has a lifespan. It doesn't come out 10 foot tall Bigfoot. It grows over time. So there's a lot of very weak arguments, I think, against this phenomenon. And when people look at evidence and want to say, it can't be that because it doesn't have this shaped foot, or it doesn't have, it's not big enough, or whatever the case may be. I mean, you could have something that easily is 5 feet tall and it's it's 10 years old or whatever.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, even now.
Yeah. And there's no way that they would have made up bare breast, which this creature had in that film in the 60s. I just don't believe that and they're a bunch of country boys. I'm sorry. They're a bunch of country boys from Northern California. They're not going to be able to create a suit like that. And even if they could, I just don't believe they would have been able to execute that complex a concept.
It's interesting, because I've never doubted the existence of Bigfoot. It's just that I never quite understood it, or I just always wondered about what we talked about, whether it's a physical phenomenon, whether it's a supernatural phenomenon, a paranormal phenomenon. And I know there are people who believe that it does have a UFO connection. So John Davis brought that up. What do you guys think about the UFO connection to Bigfoot? Is there a connection, or?
Well, people say they see them in correlation with UFOs. They say they see them coming off of UFOs, this, that, and the other. But if UFOs are abducting us, wouldn't they be abducting something comparable to us?
Oh, okay. So that they're.
I mean, that's my thought on it anyway.
Okay.
I would slide into that one too. Yeah, I don't. I try to stay. I love the woo. I'm a big woo guy. I'm a UFO believer also. But I don't think that the Bigfoot are flying UFOs around or anything like that. No. I'm in the animal camp.
Gotcha. Yeah. And it makes sense, like you said, Trey, if it is comparable, why wouldn't they be looking into them too? Because if they are experimenting on Earth, I'm sure they would want to get the full breadth of the, Earth's genetic diversity. When we talk about cover-ups, UFOs are obviously one of those things that are covered up. But, in terms of the Bigfoot cover-up, I know both of you said we don't know why it's covered up. But do either of you have theories as to just some ideas you're throwing around about it?
Trey.
Sure. I mean, there's all kinds of things have been proposed as far as, it would affect this industry or that industry due to, how the land is used. I just, what if the government has recovered these bodies. So what are they doing with them? How are they experimenting with them? For all we know, the ones we're seeing coming out of UFOs, those are government crafts. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, I just think the government covers up as much as they can. It's not part of a certain line of thinking.
It's just what they do. It's their purpose, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's theories that, when they find a spotted owl or a certain, salamander, that they, shut down all logging in within a 100-mile radius. Now imagine if the government said, hey, everybody, there's actually hominids living in the woods, Bigfoot's real, and all those people that gone missing that we've been covering up for the last 100 years. Oh, guess what? We knew about that too. And we can't cut down trees anymore. This is all endangered wildlife. All the national park systems closed. It would cause financial chaos. Not to mention there's religious aspects there too.
Yeah.
Because if there is like
go ahead.
if there is like a missing link here in North America and worldwide too, I mean that it would. I think people could handle it, but then again, you would have everybody in the country who's any sort of hunter be gearing up and going in the woods and trying to hunt these creatures down, and we don't want that either.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if they've been lying about it since the late 1800s, they can't come out and admit they've been lying about it. I guess they did that with UFOs recently, kind of.
Yeah.
But maybe one day. But I think this is even more important than UFOs, really, to be honest with you, because it's more about us. It's more about our origin. I mean, UFOs may have some aspect to our origins, but this is really, they're humans. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, the human rights stuff going on right now anyway. Can you imagine if you threw that into the mix, that we have these they're essentially humans. I mean, they're in the family. So, I mean, it would just be chaos.
Yeah, they are another tribe of people. That's what, as the indigenous people say. And even when they have, and when they have found, DNA evidence, it's always human mixed with something else, something unknown. And like, Trey was talking about, there has been interbreeding going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years,
millions of years. I mean, if you read Them and Us, which is an interesting book about
great book.
That it predicted that we would discover that Neanderthals and humans interbred, and now we've proved that, as well as Denisovans. So, I mean, we were probably breeding with all kinds of different early humans, and they've been breeding with each other, and the ones that have continued on have bred with each other as well as us for millions of years, and that's what you see now.
And I love the theory in the book that we were almost hunted down to extinction by Neanderthals, and they're the reasons that we're afraid of the dark. They're the reasons that we have folklore, and they're the reasons why humans had to become so tribal and aggressive, is because to fight off at their attacks.
Well, the documentary I'm working on, part of what we're going to look at is the Uncanny Valley, and the Uncanny Valley was discovered in the 1970s by a Japanese scientist who was looking into robotics, and what he found was the closer to human the robots looked, the more creeped out humans were by them. So the idea there is that with the Uncanny Valley is that there was something at some point in history that predated on us, but and looked like us but wasn't us. And so if you also look at when humans were coming out of Africa, right around the area where they would have met a lot of these very highly developed predator hominids, is right around the place where civilization started. So did civilization actually come forth due to the need to protect ourselves, to put up walls, and to gather together to protect ourselves from these other hominids that we were the prey of? I mean, you can look at chimpanzees eating other smaller monkeys, right? So why wouldn't that have also occurred in our early human history? And it happened because if we now know that they were interbreeding with us. Back then, it wasn't like, you know, the Neanderthal guy was showing up at the cave to take the, you know, with flowers to take the human girl out on a date. It was violent and it was scary and it was bad. And they probably, you know, took the human women, killed the human men, and probably killed the human babies too. So it was a pretty dark time, and it was probably a lot of need for us to band together to survive that.
Absolutely. And just the same way that they anthropomorphize and whitewash the appearance of Neanderthals. You know, when I was just at the museum a couple of weeks ago, and they had like the Neanderthal statue there, and it's basically it's like a caveman. But ultimately, if you know, we know what their body composition was, we know what their muscular and skeletal systems were like, we know what their skulls looked like. They didn't look anything like people.
Yeah. And I mean, what you have is people that are doing those recreations, or people that basically do forensic recreations on humans. So they're using humans as a template.
Yeah.
But we don't know what these things looked like, what their skin looked like. We don't know what their flesh looked like. We don't know. We know that they weren't. I mean, if you look at a Neanderthal skull and a Denisovan skull, they're much larger skulls. And what's interesting is they have sort of a conical head, much more than we do. So, which is a conical head is something commonly reported in Bigfoot sightings. So huge jaws, these huge mouths, which is also reported, huge eye sockets. I mean, crazy big eyes. These things look very different from humans, but they're always depicted in history books and, like you said, recreations and museums and that sort of thing as looking very human-like. They weren't. I can assure you that.
And we're talking about creatures that were 5'6" tall and weighed like 250 to 300 pounds.
All muscle.
Muscle.
The Neanderthals actually about, I think it was like 2 million years or 200,000 years or something like that. Well before we did, they were in Europe, frozen Europe. And so they were fighting other predators, saber-toothed tigers, literally, for whatever there was to eat, and probably eating saber-toothed tigers. So imagine a creature that was up there taking out big predators for food. What would that have been capable of? And then these fragile little humans start wandering out of warm Africa.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But if you even look at early human hunter and gatherer skulls versus modern skulls, the human skull looks much more robust.
Yes.
Than modern.
The whole
modern
jaw
man.
and everything. Yeah, it's because we're weak and soft now.
Yeah, I was actually just talking about that earlier today, you know, that our jaw development being influenced by what we eat. We have horrendous teeth and jaws nowadays because of this move towards softer food. And, you know, and they just had healthier bone structure in their face that led to less disease because of these better diets back in the day of harder foods. So just an anecdote there, but it really intrigues me, Trey, when you're talking about Neanderthals being nothing like, you know, the way we're taught they are. Because, you know, as soon as you said Neanderthal, my mind goes to just a more robust human, you know, with the bigger brow bone, you know, that typical.
The Geico caveman.
A little what?
The Geico caveman. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I was just about to say, just a little more robust. But man, that's creepy. That's really scary to think. You know what? We have no idea. It's even just like how they recreated dinosaur in the museum. We really don't know how they looked exactly on the outside.
Well, they're putting feathers on them now because we now know they were likely feathered, at least in the late Cretaceous period. But, you know, in the first Jurassic Park movie, they certainly weren't, because we hadn't discovered that yet. So yeah, I mean, we don't know a lot. We pretend we know a lot, but there's a lot we don't know, and so it's that's what I like, is the mystery.
And that's what's so much fun, you know, when I go out in the field, and you know, and when I'm out there 4 or 5, 6 days a week. You know, well, nights, I should say. I like to go out at night. And we always go armed, and we've seen some very interesting things. We've had some very interesting encounters. I've had rocks thrown at me. I've had I've, you know, if you've seen the video that's on SquatchMeNow Instagram, you know, I've come within 20 yards of a very large creature, bipedal, big eyes, huge, standing taller than I am. But my first encounter was the one that, like I said earlier, kind of got me hooked and got me in. And now it's scary going out there. You know, it can get kind of hairy, no pun intended, but it's always you know, and 9 times out of 10, nothing happens. You know, 99.9% of the time, nothing happens. So I don't want to paint the picture like, oh yeah, every time I go out there, something. You know, when you go out every day or 4 or 5 days a week into the woods at night, you know, you have a much better chance than going out like, you know, once a month.
I was about to say it's the consistency that makes it more likely. You know, if I were just to wander into the woods, you know, one night, yeah, it's likely
Mhm.
not. I mean, I definitely don't want to be doing that, but if I were, yeah, my chances are way lower. But I'm curious now. You talked about your first, you know, Bigfoot experience, and I don't think I know that full story. Do you mind sharing it like that?
I don't mind at all. It 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 was an accident, you know, and I wasn't into Bigfoot at the time. You know, I wasn't, you know, like I said earlier, I was aware of the stories of Bigfoot, and well, to get right to it, my ex-girlfriend and I were on a road trip up through Oregon and Washington, and what we'd like to do is we both love hiking, and you know, and I always carried a nice camera and loved taking photos of her and hikes when you like you do when you go out on
Mhm.
road trips, you know, because road trips are awesome. Everybody loves road trips. So we were on a road trip, and we're about 70 miles north of the California border into Oregon on the ocean side. So we were very close to the coast. And what we like to do is we like to find old abandoned logging trails, drive up the logging trails, park, and then just find, you know, game trails or wherever and just hike and take photos. You know, just hike like an hour in just while you're on a road trip and see the sights. Because if you've ever been to the Pacific Northwest or even North of America, when you're driving out there, it's the wilderness. I mean, there's nothing out there as far as the eye can see. There's places where people probably, you know, haven't been to in decades. And these old abandoned logging roads, which there are hundreds of them up in the Pacific Northwest, it's beautiful area. It's beautiful hiking. It's lush. It's green. It's cool. It's right on the right off the ocean. You can see like all the skyline. You get up there in the mountains, and there's fog setting in, and a beautiful ocean view. So why not? So it was a July 4th weekend, and we driven up the logging road. We parked like usual, and around my neck I had a DSLR camera, and on my hip I had a Glock 19. Because when I'm in the woods and on road trips, I always carry a gun with me because you know there's black bears up there and there's mountain lions, and that's kind of thing you think about. Also, people, you know, there's weirdos in the woods. You know, sometimes, especially up in that area, people are um, interested in agriculture, I'll just say. But, you know, so we're up there and we hike in and we're in about, you know, I would say probably half a mile or so, and we come across this weird kind of structure. And and I had no idea what I was looking at. Like I said, I wasn't into Bigfoot. And I was snapping photos of it. And it was kind of like a lean-to. I'll be happy to share those photos with you later if you want. I think I've sent them to you, Trey, haven't I?
Maybe.
Yeah. And I was very confused because I was like, wow, you know, who would have built this up here? Because there was no remnants of a campfire, there was no trash or litter anywhere. You know, people are typically kind of mindless and disgusting when they're in the woods. So I was looking for signs of people, there was none there. And I was like, well, this is interesting. So, but whatever, paid no mind. We kept going, and we entered into like a bowl-shaped canyon. And you know, she was walking next to me and she's talking, and you know, we're just having a pleasant conversation. And all of a sudden, the woods went silent, like dead
Ooh.
silent. And I stopped, and I stopped her. I said, "Do you hear that?" And she goes, "Well, what do you mean? I don't hear anything." And I said, "Exactly. Why is it so quiet?" And then, you know, probably 50, maybe 60 yards away, this creature popped up and huffed at us. Yeah, like a sound like that. And I remember the first thought that I had was, "Oh my God, there's a gorilla in the woods." And I looked over at her, and she just turned and just booked it. She just like sprinted as fast as she could go. I turned around to look back at the creature, and it's gone. It's gone back because it was like ferns everywhere, like dense ferns. I have pictures of the area. And I'm like, oh my God, it went down. It dropped low because I didn't see it standing up. It just kind of like came up out of the undergrowth. And said, "Oh shit, is it coming towards us?" So I started backing out, and I had a camera around my neck and I had a gun on my hip, and it didn't even occur to me to reach for either.
Just the
And
shot. Oh wow.
it was terrible. And as soon as I got out of that little bowl canyon, I turned and I started running too. I got back to the car and she was there and she was very upset and, you know, tears and everything. Get me out of here, you know what? And we got in the car and got out of there as quickly as possible. And ever since then, whenever I have the chance, I go out there and I look.
So, and which is now the 4 to 5 days a week. I mean, that's dedicated. That's intense.
Mm-hmm.
And Trey, do you also go out hunting and or do you investigate more in the, you know, the research side,
I do both. You know, it's both. Yeah, I don't go 4 or 5 days a week. I'm not able to do that, unfortunately. But yeah, I do go out and have been doing more of that as we're shooting this doc, interviewing witnesses and going to those same areas and going to places. I mean, I found some great tracks last fall. I'm going to be going back to that area again to do some more investigating because it was some very interesting tracks. But yeah, it's a mix. Do a little bit of all of it.
And speaking of tracks, you know, and physical evidence like that, why do you guys think we don't see like you know, besides seeing tracks, why don't we ever come across like a body? Is it because they're intelligent and they decide to take, you know, to take the other members of the Bigfoot tribe and bury them or bring them somewhere, or have there been bodies found and just, you know, nobody talks about it?
Ask a hunter if they've ever found a bear body. They'll tell you no. I mean, very rarely do people find like bear remains. So, you know, could they be taking the body? Sure. I mean, could they? A lot of animals, if they're wounded or dying, they're gonna crawl in somewhere and that's safe, kind of place to sort of to pass away. Maybe they're climbing up into caves. Who knows? I'm not really sure. That's a good question. But stuff also goes away really quickly. If you've ever watched those sort of time lapse videos of animals deteriorating after death, it happens pretty quickly, especially in the types of environments that we see these creatures. Sort of temperate rainforest, that sort of thing. That body's gonna go away pretty quickly, and little animals are gonna chew the bones to pieces and carry them off into caves too. I mean, you go into caves quite often. But there have been, I mean, to answer that question also, those bodies have been found. People have hit them with cars.
Yes.
People have found bodies. People have found bones. I mean, there's a long history in the late 1800s, you know, of bones being found, and the Smithsonian shows up. Smithsonian was actually putting out, hey, send us your bones, you know, when you find these giant bones and that kind of stuff, and they would just disappear. But there are plenty of cases that when Mount St. Helens blew, there were supposedly quite a few bodies that were taken off the mountain in military helicopters. So there's been cases of people hitting them with cars and they're dead, and people show up and take the body away. So there have been bodies, but it's what happens to the bodies that's really the question.
So there's a very strict control on the
Some
bodies.
people also will shoot them. There's been cases of hunters shooting at them and then being so freaked out that it looks so human, they thought they were going to get in trouble, so they get rid of the body.
And also, you know, if these creatures, they do have a spoken language. You know, they're like, if you look at the Sequoia sounds and so on and so forth, they actually are able to communicate. And if they're able to communicate through a language, what makes you think that they don't honor their dead too?
Okay.
The same way we would.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, so somebody's coming. So basically, you know, whether it be another Bigfoot or whether it be the government or the Smithsonian taking them away, somebody, yeah, there it sounds like there's like a, you know, there's a pretty tight control on the bodies, besides the fact that the deterioration happening, you know, versus if a Sasquatch were to die in the desert, we would, because there aren't all those beetles and everything present to deteriorate the body, it would likely stay longer. Have there been sightings in the desert?
Absolutely, yeah.
Those
Up
nice.
up in Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California. That's just about an hour and a half north of Los Angeles. I've actually talked to MPs on base who've been witnesses and have had encounters. They call it the Sandman up there.
Mm.
So we have there, and also throughout Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, down by San Diego, you have the Zoobies, the famous Zoobies. That was a very well documented case down there. So yes, they are in desert environments. A lot of times, people who cross the border will actually report seeing Sasquatch or being chased by
Oh,
strange
wow.
animals, which is interesting. I've also talked to Vietnam veterans who will tell me about the rock apes that they encountered when they were in country in Vietnam. That was Vietnam's version of Bigfoot, and
Mhm.
and also even in when I go out there and I talk to people, I've talked to several people who have encounters. It's not rare for people to have encounters, but you have to figure that there's how many people every year report seeing Bigfoot? About 10,000.
A lot.
A
And
lot.
a lot of
A
people aren't
fraction.
reporting it.
That's a fraction of the people who have an encounter, because you get ridiculed, you get made fun of.
Mhm.
There's a big stigma. Oh, you're a crazy redneck if you see Bigfoot. But I've talked to business people. I've talked to, professional hunters who don't go out in the woods anymore because of what they've seen. And that's what I said. Like, I have no idea what's out there, but there is something out there.
Mhm.
I had a military helicopter pilot that was in Afghanistan tell me that he was flying over the Chinese-Afghan border and saw a troop of giant gorillas.
So a whole troop of
That's
them.
yeah, he said I think it was 12 to 20 of these giant, and it wasn't shadows and rocks or anything. He was like, they were moving independently, and he said they just look like giant gorillas. Well, there's no gorillas in that area of the world. So what was that he saw? Who knows? But it was an interesting story.
And it's amazing because one has to be scary enough. I'm just imagining like coming face to face with a whole troop. You talk about, wow. And speaking of reporting, I know like for UFO reports, people report to New Fork, the National UFO Reporting Center. Is there like one main place where people can go to report Bigfoot sightings? Or
Well, there's the Bigfoot Mapping Project, which is
Okay.
now an app on your phone, which is terrific. There's the BFRO. And people have mixed opinions about the BFRO. I don't have an opinion on them. John Davis has put something up on the screen, which is amazing. Yes, David Politis works on the missing 411 videos. Absolutely amazing. And I'm sure we can drop some really cool, if the viewers want to go out there and look at some cool videos later, we'll drop some names of people they can look up too. But go ahead, Trey. What say you?
What were we talking about? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, go ahead, Ash.
Oh, the way to go about reporting.
Reporting. Yeah, I mean, he pretty much named it. You can always send me your information. I want to hear your story. But
send it to Trey. Yeah.
BFRO, Bigfoot Mapping Project. I really love. I have that app. But yeah, it's those are probably the two main ones I would say that you can report to. There's not really a centralized system. But I would say Bigfoot Mapping is where I would go. I hear mixed things about the BFRO. So
yeah, same here. And just some, if you're going to go out there and if you're going to go in the woods, I'll give you some quick tips. If you hear anybody calling for help, don't explore it. Yeah. If you see any lights in the woods, don't follow them.
Can they imitate humans and call for help?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, that's the idea. Babies.
They'll call. Babies.
They make
crying.
baby sounds.
Oh my gosh.
They call people out by names.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lots of
So
reports of that.
Mm-hmm.
talk about some,
Yeah.
really intelligent activity happening.
Yeah.
The fact
I
that they
mean,
hear.
oh yeah, and the Siege of Honobia. Remember the Siege of Honobia?
Yeah.
That's a fantastic account where these two brothers bought this property, lived there with their family, and they got onslaughted by these creatures, and they actually was able to kill one of them, and and the other creatures came and took the body away. So that's something that's interesting to think about.
It is, and and it's certainly, it's amazing because we live in this society that is kind of, and it's intentional. We're fed this very narrow view of the world, where it's just us, it's the animals. There's nothing more going on, So when people do stop to kind of explore the fact that there is way more than we imagine, I mean, it is mind blowing. It's mind blowing to think that, oh no, there are intelligent creatures wandering around, that it's not just us, and they will lure you, and they will take their dead, and they will cover up all evidence of it, and the government's involved in it too. Like, can you, like, for me, I'm like, can you imagine hearing it? I mean, like, I've always been open to it, but for everybody who isn't, these people that are on there, that they can't break that narrow-minded worldview, I'm like, wow, hearing this, all for the first time, for somebody that can't break out of that, it must be just like this complete, brain melt going on now. So, like, because of that, like, have you ever seen, people who are like that, who make that connection for the first time, like, and have had their world shaken? Or are most people just like, absolutely not, I'm not even gonna, hands off, I don't believe it, and I don't want to explore that? Like, what kind of attitudes did you guys see, in that regard
When
from
I had
people?
my encounter and I got back home, I told some of my closest friends, and they all laughed at me.
Mm.
I think that people, I understand why people would be, or would think that that's very fanciful, that it's, it's very woo woo, it's very, people straight up laugh, and these are people who I know and have known me for years. Um, I just don't think most people are ready, and like you said, we are told this very narrow version of history, this very narrow version of the world, this very narrow version of the universe. It's very sanitized. I think there's a lot more out there that we don't know about. Trey?
Yeah, I mean, I have one witness in the documentary that, he's told me that, if he's ever out at like a party or something and tries to talk about it, his friends will come up and be like, listen, don't talk about that. I feel like cognitive dissonance is a really serious thing with a lot of these kinds of subjects. And, anytime I try to talk to people about it that aren't already sort of open or enlightened to it, even if they're fairly open-minded people, or even if they aren't like, no, that's stupid, shut up, they just kind of glaze over. A lot of people just glaze over, they kind of shut down, they just kind of nod, and then it's like, okay. But
Like
I challenge it. Yeah, I challenge anyone that is a non-believer or is at all maybe want to think about this. I think a lot of people just don't want to think about it because it's not easy to think about things like this. To just start pulling on that thread. Go to my page and just go through all the curated evidence that's there. Go to Sasquatch Chronicles, go find some podcasts. I don't think that anybody that makes any sort of even half-hearted attempt to look into this subject is going to come away with anything but, this is a real phenomenon that's occurring, and wow, that's crazy, because it is. I mean, all you have to do is look. All you have to do is open your eyes and just take a real look at it. And you won't be able to come to any other conclusion, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Like Nico from Project Go and See, Utah Sasquatch. He had a great channel. The Bob Gimlin channel on YouTube is one of my favorites. And I'm sure we have all looked at Bob Gimlin's videos. Not Bob Gimlin from the Gimlin Patterson film, but this YouTuber named Bob Gimlin. He puts out fantastic Bigfoot content, and from a very scientific point of view. You have Thinker Thunker, who does video breakdowns and puts everything to scale so we can actually see what's going on. geez, of course, Sasquatch Chronicles. And then you can get into the realms of the other cryptids. We can talk about the little people. We can talk about Dogman. We can talk about mountain giants. We can talk about the Wendigos. We can talk about all the different
Abra.
kinds of things that go bump in the night.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think it makes life a lot more fun.
It does. And it's
I think it
funny
makes
because
life-
people want to like look at us as, you know, being the crazy ones to believe these things. But it's like, you know, and how much crazier do you have to be to not accept that there's anything else besides us? You know, to me, that's a lot crazier. You know, like you said, there's so much of North America that is unexplored. Same thing with our oceans. We don't know what's in there, you know, so it seems very, besides narrow-minded, it seems very egotistical just to think that, nope, that is what it is. And as humans, we know it. And, you know, and it's undeniable. There's nothing else. It's just, you know, people imagining things. It's like, no, you're the crazy one. You're the crazy one thinking about that. And it's all about guitar. Wanted to comment on what you said earlier, Hexn00b, about, you know, not exploring screaming in the woods. It's interesting that he says don't explore people screaming for help. Out hiking, I heard screaming. I thought it was college kids screwing around. As I got closer, it sounded real and I ignored it. And you know, that tugs on our heartstrings when we hear screaming. As humans, that's our instinct. We, you know, so it's like, wow, they know our instincts and they are preying on that instinct. Yeah, they know us. It's interesting that it's like they're, besides living alongside us without us knowing, they're also apparently watching and observing us, and they know about us too. You know,
and it's tough too, because I've gotten some pretty interesting screams on camera, or at least the audio portion, because it's usually pretty dark. And I'll show it to people, and they're like, "Oh, that's coyotes." I'm like, "Listen, you weren't there. You were not there. I know what coyotes sound like. I've grown up around coyotes. I've had them in my yard every day. This is not coyotes. You know, do coyotes throw rocks? And if they do, since when?"
they have opposable thumbs now, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and we're also talking about like a volume, a level of volume of the scream that when you, because it's it shakes you to your soul. Like would, you know, it's and like when I say, people are like, "Oh, I really want to go out there and see the big," I'm like, you know, no matter, you know, I out of all the times I go out in the woods, I've had 2 visual encounters. 2. We're talking about, you know, and this is almost going back almost, geez, 8 years now, and, you know, several times a week going out in the woods. You know, that's a lot of time out there. And I just say, be careful what you wish for.
Now
You
your
know,
second. I'm sorry to interrupt. Your second. I just want to, you know, to get this and make sure I'm understanding. So your second visual encounter, that was the one that you got all those views on.
yeah, that's one
Okay.
that's on Trey's site.
Okay. And I'm sorry. Continue what you were going to say.
Just be careful what you wish for. You know, you know, people think it's a game. You know, you see like the people watching Finding Bigfoot and everything, and the people on those shows are terrific. You know, whatever. But you know, you're not. I would definitely recommend not going out in the woods and doing your Bigfoot calls, and because, you know, what are you going to do if something answers back? What are you going to do if something comes in to investigate, or even just some other predator? You know, you have to be careful out there. It's not a game. It's not a game when you're out there in nature. You know, it gets very, very real. Do I think Bigfoots have the ability to create fire, cook meat, or warm themselves with it? No, I don't think they do. Although the indigenous people said they stopped using fire because it gave away their positions in the woods.
Wow. Talk about some intelligence going on there, because we would look at that typically and say, okay, look, they're not using fire. They're not cooking or warming their food. They must not be that smart, you know, but it's interesting because there's so many other ways to judge intelligence besides that, you know, like that is smart to then be like, okay, we're not going to use it because we're not going to give away our position.
Well, if the kill is very fresh, you don't necessarily need to cook it. And something that's interesting that's going on sort of in pop culture right now is the popularity of the consumption of organ meat, which is, what's interesting about that is the organs are very nutritious because so much moves through them. You know, a lot of nutrition is stored there. And if you look at a lot of kill reports, they talk about the first thing that's harvested by these creatures is the organs. that's eaten immediately, and then they'll stash the rest of the kill somewhere else, or they carry it off. But immediately, they're eating those organ meats. So that's a big thing in a certain area of the health world, is organ meat, and it's interesting that there's a correlation there.
Yeah, and that we're just kind of now catching on as humans.
Well, we were doing it a long time ago.
Yeah, or back, full circle,
yeah,
I should say.
Yeah, we're back full circle. Yeah, exactly.
And oh gosh, I had a question that just escaped me, but now we're hitting the hour 15 point, so I'm sure you guys do want to head out. But like, would you guys be cool taking some more questions if anyone wants to drop a few into the chat?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, cool. So yeah, so if anybody has any questions before we leave that you want to throw in the chat for Hexn00b or for Trey, I'd say throw them in there now.
Yeah, and I would definitely say follow Trey on Instagram and what's your preferred, Trey? What's your preferred?
Any of them. I have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, but Instagram probably has the most comprehensive amount of information there. So if you want to really kind of look at it all, I've got pretty much break it down between visual evidence, track evidence, and historical accounts, as well as more modern news reports.
Terrific.
So
and yeah, check him out. Also, Sasquatch Chronicles, must listen if you want to hear hundreds of different accounts. I would say Bob Gimlin on YouTube, Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. Remember them?
Yeah.
Bear and Kumbo, fantastic. Yep. I love Bigfoot Outlaw Radio. They're awesome. And yeah, just get out there and just start looking. Go out there and see what you can see. And they're not hard to find. They're not. You don't have to go far.
Go up the trail like a mile, if that. Mm-hmm. Just go off the trail. Most people stay on the trail. Get off the trail.
Yep.
It sounds like a good philosophy for life too.
Yep.
Yeah, got to get off that trail. And also, so to anybody watching in the replay, or for anybody who's watching live, if you come back once this is in replay, I will be dropping all the social media and website info into the description. And I will be dropping a lot of those suggestions that you guys have mentioned. So thank you for all those suggestions. I'll put those in there. So now I'm gonna pop back over to the live chat. So Tin Top has an interesting question. Can either of you do a Bigfoot call?
I don't know how to.
Yeah, I'm not really.
I can.
It's not something I've practiced.
No,
I don't really. That's not really the mode I do. I don't think running around in the woods hollering like that is really the best way to operate, in my opinion. One thing I would say is if you're going out, don't take a GoPro or a cell phone and try to get visual evidence. You need a long lens. This is something I always hear on social media is, why can't we get a good video? Well, look at the lenses that nature photographers use. And Nat Geo and all these people are putting people out in wilderness for years at a time with the proper stabilization equipment, with the proper photographic equipment. You're talking 600 millimeter lenses. Your phone has about a 24 millimeter lens at most, typically. Get the longest lens you can get your hands on if you really want to get a solid shot of one of these things. You really need a long lens, and it's something that really, it's hard for me to take a lot of these shows seriously. A lot of these Bigfoot shows seriously when I know that they're professionally produced by people that understand photography, but you never see anyone with a long lens. It makes me very skeptical of their seriousness about what they're trying to do, because running around with a GoPro or any of that kind of thing, with a super wide lens, you're not going to get the detail. Why can't we get a detailed shot? Why is the footage or the video or whatever so degraded? A lot of times it's because we have to zoom in so far, crop in so far to just see what we're looking at. But when you do that, it doesn't matter if you have 1080, 4K, or 8K. At a certain point, when you crop it in enough, it's going to degrade the footage. So get a long lens, and if you're going to have a long lens, if you're going to need some sort of stabilization, because the further zoomed in you are, if if you're shooting video at least, the least amount of state is going to get more and more shaky. So get a tripod, a monopod, a gimbal, get something, and get a long lens on there, and then maybe you might have it, because most of these shots are from a distance. You know, you're not going to get that close. So you need a long lens to really get a good photo.
And Trey, what do you think about the Todd Standing footage?
You know, I would love for that to be real, and I have seen, he's got one where the creature is like running up a hill. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
almost like a vertical hill, and to me that's the most convincing of anything he's got. The rest of it, you know, he's got one that, you know, when you look at it, you're like, oh, that's pretty convincing, but at the end of the day, it kind of looks like a guy in grease paint. You know, it just looks like a dude. There's the other ones look to me to be almost variations of the same attempt to create something. You know, almost like I'm experimenting with different models of something I'm creating. I don't know. I would really love. I don't understand why there's nothing. None of them really move. None of them really run away. There's nothing. It's a very short clip, and they're usually like frozen. Which at the same time, I can argue that a lot of people say that when they see them, they're super still, which is great and all. But you don't see breath. You don't see, most of them. You don't see any like blinking or anything like that. It's hard to say. I don't want to call anybody a liar. You know, I don't want to call anybody, you know, a hoaxer, because I can't. Just like I can't prove that there's a Bigfoot. I can't prove that you hoaxed it unless I was there watching you hoax it. So I'm not going to say that, but I'm just going to say that I'm not fully convinced by anything that he's put out. Other than, I mean, like I said, the best thing I saw was one where the creature was actually moving and it was running up a hill almost vertically, which was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I've seen that footage. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. How about the Mayak skunk egg photos?
I mean, to me, based on what they describe in the South, that seems pretty legit. In my opinion, that creature looks, when I think about, you know, my experience in practical effects, that's another thing that gets me, is like these videos and photos that are very good. You're talking about a very expensive thing to just, for nothing. Nobody got anything out of the Mayak 8 photos. Nobody became famous. Nobody, I mean, you're going to spend so much money. I mean, you have to punch hair by hair to create something that looks like that. That is so much work and so much time and money. And that's something I go into my documentary. I get into the focal length issue. I get into what it takes to actually, we're creating some different Bigfoot suits to kind of show people what it would really take to hoax this kind of thing. And then when you get into like the Leaping Yeti video, the Leaping Almasty video, the physicality of the creature looking at that, to me, that's the best Bigfoot video out there. I think that's better than Patterson Gimlin, because the physicality of that video, you can see the musculature of that creature just like you can in the Patterson Gimlin, but it is moving like something you've never seen. I mean, it's moving like it's a 12-foot chimpanzee, right? Wow. I mean, it looks, I don't know if you've seen that one, Ashley, but
no, I haven't.
Go check it out. It is mind blowing, and it comes out of Russia. And for anyone to think that some poor people in Siberia were able to hoax that, I can tell you, I worked in CGI too. That's an incredibly difficult thing. I always will just point to the Hulk. Look how fake the Hulk looks. And how much money Marvel has, how much money Disney has, and they still can't create a Hulk that looks anything like you would, if that realistic, to be honest. I think they still look extremely fake. So take the shakiness of the camera, which you have to, you know, motion track all of that if it was CGI. Then you have to, you know, deal with the trees that are in the way of the creature. You have to deal with all the underbrush, all the different things in that video that you would have to. It's impossible. That is an amazing video, and that creature is huge.
Yeah, monstrous,
and moving like no athlete you've ever seen. I mean,
wow. I'm really curious about this one. I've never even heard of it. I've heard of, like some of the other more famous ones that were spoken
I'll
about
send it to
before.
you after the show. I'll send it to you on Instagram.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Thank you. Yeah.
Or
And
even,
then
or even even the Bigfoot throwing the tree. The Canadian,
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
the guys in Canada filmed the workers. That
Yeah.
was amazing. It's and people are like, well, it could be this or it could be that. And I'm like, what else could it be?
yeah, and it's just like, like you were saying, Trey, like where does you're not making money off these videos, nothing else is coming. You're not going to get your own TV show off of it. So why would somebody go through the time and effort, to invest in that? It's so true. When you
Nobody
think
becomes famous. Nobody becomes famous. I mean, Bob Gimlin, but he like went into seclusion for a long time because it was such. Most people have it has a more negative impact on their life than it has a positive one. So I'm telling you, I've looked at almost every video that's ever been created, every photo that's ever. I mean, and there are some really good ones, and there's no way that the people that took those videos produced those creatures in any sort of practical effect way or any sort of CGI. If you look at Paul Freeman's footage, that man did not create that creature. He did not create that suit. And there was no CGI in 1994, not like that. So, I mean,
yeah, they're giving people way too much credit.
That's
Occam's razor.
That's the Independence Day footage, isn't it?
No, the Freeman footage. It's a little bit different. Independence Day footage is also extremely excellent. If you think about this creature, so if you talk about that from a practical effects standpoint, if you ever put a Bigfoot suit on, and I've got a 6'8" guy, 350-pound guy in my documentary, that's our main Bigfoot decoy, if you will, and he can't see out of the damn thing very well. He can't see out of the suit. We had him run up and down hills last winter. Just what the toll that puts on this man's body alone is rough because it was about 15 degrees and he was sweating unbelievably. And then, but to get back to the Independence Day footage, it's a creature walking down about a 45-degree slant in a boulder field. It's looking back at the camera most of the time. It's staring at the camera while it's walking down this boulder field, and it's holding a baby. And this baby is moving independently. So if the only way you could do that is to put a guy in a suit. It's a really good suit if it is. No one's ever taken credit for this video, by the way. It's completely anonymous. This creature is walking down a 45-degree angle boulder field carrying a puppet that he's also animating and looking at the camera the whole time, and he didn't trip and kill himself. At some point, Occam's razor cuts our way.
Oh, for sure.
If you really look at this stuff seriously and really think about it from a practical standpoint, there's no way that a lot of these videos were hoaxed.
Yeah, that's true. I never gave it much thought that way. I mean, like, again, I'm not a skeptic when it comes to it, but I never thought about, let's look at it both ways of it, that if these people are creating it, with practical effects of CGI, maybe they should go into the business of it because they're doing way better than everybody else in this business.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at it from a skeptical, every time I see a video, I try to be as skeptical as possible. And I try to think about how would I have created this? How would I have done this? And it's just a lot of some of them are, some of them, okay. And I do post some that I'm like, okay, this could have been done, but what do you guys think? But the best footage, the best photos, there's no point. There's no point in spending all that money and all that time and all that talent and not being really rich from it, because I mean, if someone had made one of these and then like the Independence Day footage, if they had made that and then used it as part of their reel to get makeup effects work, then I would say, okay, that makes sense. But even the Giant of the Sequoias, which was supposedly filmed by film students, was supposedly part of a short mockumentary the guy was making. I don't know. It was very weird because I remember when that video first came out in the mid 2000s, and there was a lot of like weirdness around it. And then suddenly the guy's basically kind of like doesn't talk about it anymore. This was a film student. If he had created that suit and created he's never showed the suit. He's never shown how he made the suit. It's this very famous film now, but the story behind it is supposedly that he was just this filmmaker that was just making this mockumentary. But to me at the time, when it first broke and all that came out, it was almost like somebody got to him, in my
I was
opinion.
just about to
That's
say
just how I
that
feel.
sounds right.
Because if it was me and I was a film student at the time, I would have been like, hey guys, look at how awesome. Once it got big and once it was all over with, I would have released a behind the scenes. I said, this is how we made this awesome video. This is how we made this awesome suit. There's this thing. And again, back to the suit and the difficulty of moving the suit. This thing is jumping over logs and down like a vertical cliff about 15 feet in this Bigfoot suit, chasing a guy, and then just runs off through the woods. Now there's some cuts, but they were shooting on film. Anybody knows about film, you only got about 3 minutes. And there were multiple cameras running. So people are like, oh, well, there's a cut. Well, it was probably a different, they're running there is some photos of them shooting when they first went out. They were supposedly, originally the story was they were just shooting B-roll on film. I think it was 16 millimeter. And, you know, to me, it looked like, okay, there were multiple people shooting and one guy got this shot, probably ran out of film, and one guy got this other shot. Maybe it's fake, but if it had been me, I would have made a whole career off that.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would just never talk about it again. Yeah. You know, I don't know why you would never talk. Have you seen that one, the Giant Sequoias?
I don't think I have. Yeah. So
I'll send that one to you too. The ladder shot in the sequence, it looks like the biggest linebacker you've ever seen, covered in hair, just running through the woods. I mean, it's amazing. It's a great suit. I would love to know how they made the suit, to be honest with you.
And also, people of that size don't move that gracefully and swiftly either. You know, I would say, you know, a lot of muscle, a lot of mass to be moving around like that. So suit or not, that's not human.
And just like going back to the Minnesota Iceman, you know, when I forget what college went out and they went to go look at, you know, his so-called caveman that he had stored in ice, they were like astounded. They you know, and they quickly realized this wasn't a hoax. Well, when he went over to Canada to go display the creature in Canada, when he came back, he brought a replica with him. You know, he was still trying to pawn off as the original creature. So somehow, you know, either the powers that be came and took it from him, and the whole story behind him, he was showing off antique tractors. He wasn't he was a retired Air Force captain who was displaying antique tractors at, you know, local county fairs, and he happened to shoot this animal and, you know, freeze it, and he decided to show it off because he thought it was a novelty. That's a great story also.
I've also heard that it was a rocket that was brought back by the military or by some guy through military connections, which is interesting. But yeah, when they tried to, when they were, who was it? Was it Ivan Sanderson that went and looked at it? I can't remember who went and actually looked at it, but
I'll have to look it up.
They started defrosting it. When they started defrosting it, there was the air bubbles started coming out, and the air bubbles smelled like a decaying animal, which would mean it probably wasn't fake.
Now, somebody just mentioned, like, could these hoaxes be controlled opposition? Controlled opposition to what? And that's the thing. Like, people, you know, are there hoax videos? Absolutely. I would say for every 100 videos, I would say probably 99% of them are hoaxes or misidentified. And then you have one or two. You probably have a handful of really great videos. And I'm sure there are videos out there that have never hit the internet that people have that we'll never see that are just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, in their own private archives. But it's like you got to sift through all the garbage to find the gold.
Oh, absolutely. And John Davis says, you know, the video David Paulides of the Sasquatch researcher in the 70s. Yeah, that's the Sierra sounds. Yeah, the Sierra sounds are amazing. If you haven't heard those, Ash, you got to give those a listen.
But now I'm like, I feel like I'm going to be deep diving, you know, with all these instances that you've mentioned, you know, and I know a lot of these are famous videos, but I feel like even if you're into, like, you know, stranger stuff and cryptids, gosh, there's so much of it to cover. Like, you know, like this is like definitely a big intro to me, and I can't wait to dive into all this. So I will be hitting you guys up for some of this, you know, for some of these examples, and I will tweet them out if you guys are cool with that too, so that anybody following here will be able to follow up those videos too. Michael Parks asks an interesting question. He says, is there more of a correlation between hunters who hide their scents with deer urine, for example, or just between hikers and campers? Will the Bigfoots choose one or over the other? So, like, is there a certain way you guys think they're tracking humans through scents? Or?
Well, I that's an interesting question. The hunters who I've talked to who have had experiences, I don't remember at the very beginning I said if we have an encounter or if they show themselves, it's because they choose to, or like Trey said, that they're trying to distract us from something else. I highly doubt that we surprise them in their own element at all. That we can sneak up on them and fool them. I don't think that's going to happen. I just
there are
don't
a
think.
lot of accounts. There are a lot of hunters accounts where they're up really high in tree stands.
Yes.
And these things will wander up because the scent's too high. They don't smell them, and so they'll just kind of wander into the tree stand. That's the only case where that might actually
True.
happen.
True. Like
but
the one hunter
on the
I
ground.
talked to, he was in a stand. The guy I talked to who had an encounter. But I don't. Go ahead. Go on with what you're saying.
No, that was it. That's all I got.
Yeah, I don't.
Climb?
I'm
Can
sorry.
I'm sorry, but do they climb if somebody
Absolutely.
isn't? Okay.
There's been sightings of them in trees.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
They have
Like
their
big ones in
sentinels. Yeah, their sentinels will stay up there and keep watch, the day watchers as they call them, because it is believed that they are primarily nocturnal.
Okay.
And that, I mean, this is just what I've heard from researchers. I mean, it could be, I mean, who knows, but it seems to make sense to me that they're primarily nocturnal because, number one, they have less chance to be seen, better hunting times, and they can be more stealthy.
They also spider crawl, almost like a military crawl. So they get down low too. I mean, you could be walking past one and it's not up high; it's down on the ground.
That's what when I'm out there in the field, I'm always looking down. I'm always like looking low. The one that I came across actually in that video was down low, and it got up. We had turned a corner and it was there, and it got up and it jumped like vertical off of where we were, and then it turned and stood and looked at us, and that's where I started filming.
And the amazing thing is, because of the way that they can climb up trees, they do stay low to the ground, they are nocturnal, they know how to conceal themselves. It makes me wonder how many people have walked by these things and never even noticed, just like regular people. If we have all maybe had a sighting, not a sighting, if we've all had an encounter in our lives that maybe we don't know because they're like these masters of concealment. It's really interesting when you start thinking about it like that.
Even more interesting than that, in the documentary, we were in a warehouse putting the Bigfoot together, and I said, you know what, we got a busy road outside. Let's just bring him outside and see what happens. So we bring him out to the road, and I would say 90% of the cars that went by didn't see him. He was in a wide open parking lot, staring at the road, 6'8", 350 pounds, full Bigfoot suit. People are looking at their phones, they're looking at the road ahead of them, they're doing all kinds of other things. So now put one just within the tree line on the side of a highway. No one's ever going to see him. No one's ever going to see. This guy was standing in the middle of a parking lot in the middle of a city, lots of cars passing by, and I would say 1 out of 10 people that drove past maybe even looked over and was like, hey, that's weird. I thought people would just be honking or freaking out or whatever. Nobody even looked.
And that's interesting. And another point, and what's up, the thoughts child who just jumped in the chat. Hey man, how you doing? What I like when I'm in the woods and I'm off trail, when I'm heading back to trail, there's usually hikers and people walking around there. If I don't want to be seen, and I do this all the time, and I'm not in a ghillie suit, I'm not in camouflage, I'm in jeans and a t-shirt, I'll simply stand still and not look at them. And it's like I turn invisible. They don't see me, they don't notice me. And I could be 15 feet away from them. They'll have no idea that I'm there. You know, people don't pay attention to their surroundings.
And it's amazing because when you guys spoke about them calling people by name or imitating different screams or baby cries, and the fact that people don't notice what's going around them, even if these things aren't concealing themselves, it really is creepy to think that they could just be there watching all the time, you know, picking up all this different info from us, just observing, biding their time. It's kind of a scary thought, you know, to look at it that way, at least to me. I'm like, you know, you don't know when you're being watched. You don't know when you're out sunbathing, reading a book, if something's watching you, you know?
Well, you know, in missing 411, a lot of the time it's somebody that got too far down the trail ahead of everybody else or was too far behind. So reach out, grab them. I mean, they're described when they're hunting by indigenous people as well as modern sightings as just snapping the neck of a deer like nothing, like it's nothing. So what would they do to a human? You would never have to say a word. If someone's 50 feet down the trail from you and they snatch you, snap your neck, you're not going to say anything. No one's ever going to know. Yeah.
Definitely. You know, a good reason to be in groups, to not just take that nature trail by yourself.
Stay together. Don't be the last one in the line. You know, it's like some of the native people call them the hides behind. That's another. They hide behind things. You know, it's just you have to be aware. And most people who go out in the woods, it's like that woman a couple of years ago. She tried to sue the state of California for. You remember this story?
I don't know.
I'll have to send you a link. She got footage of Bigfoot. And she tried to sue the state of California for covering up the existence of the animal. It was a pretty big case, and she was like a school teacher or something. I'll have to dig it up and send it out to you. I just thought about that, but it was interesting because these people go out in the woods all the time. They have no idea the environment they're going into, and just like all the kids, I'm missing 411. Oh, my son ran 15 feet away behind a bush, and he disappeared. We've never found him ever again. Dennis Martin, and then the Key family. Saw the bear running with something over his shoulder, 5 miles away, and then they call in the National Guard, they call in the FBI, they call in the Green Berets. Nobody can turn up everything. Everybody's working independently of each other. Nobody can figure out what's going on. There's no communication, and little boys never heard of ever again.
Oh wow!
Green Berets weren't even there to find him, I don't think.
No.
It's kind of like like the dingo ate my baby, except the
Bigfoot ate my baby.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's funny. They really sort of diminished the reality of this, and these sort of tabloid rags. I had a baby with Bigfoot and all this stuff, but there are tons of stories. There's a story from British Columbia of a Native American woman. Told the story herself. It was recorded in fairly modern times. I mean, not modern, but early 1900s. She was taken. She was bred with.
Wow.
She eventually started getting sick, and she was pregnant. So the Bigfoot takes her back to her people. She has this stillborn baby. And I mean, that story is on the SquatchMeNow Instagram too. But something that's interesting and creepy about that story is that she was walking down a trail. Big arm reaches out, pulls her into the brush. He puts tree sap over her eyes to glue her eyes shut so she doesn't know where she's going. And when he takes it off her eyes, she's in this cave with with like a family of Bigfoot. And he had brought her there to breed with. Now, if they have small populations, it makes sense. And they know that they can interbreed with us. It makes sense that they're going to go out and try to grab some fresh breeding stock because it's a small population. That's not going to be good after a certain amount of time. But that story is, I'm trying to remember her name, and I can't think of it right now, but that's a story that's interesting. But in the Sulculu story, which Dennis Martin was taken from an area very close to where Sulculu and his people supposedly lived. It wasn't a story like that, but it was a story of a Native American woman that lived on the edge of town, and her mom wanted her to find a good hunter. And this Sulculu, this giant, came to her and would start bringing her deer. Mom asked for her to ask him for firewood, so he brings whole trees that have just been uprooted from the ground and leaves them outside their hut. But every night he comes, and eventually they have a child. They have children together, and she goes off and lives with him in the underground world where these creatures live.
Hmm. It's interesting, and even in Theodore Roosevelt's book, the what was it, The Wilderness Hunter?
Yeah,
Name of the book. Yeah, there's a Sasquatch story in that book. You know, from a former president. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Where and to sum up the story for you, Bauman's story. Bauman, was that? Yeah, Bauman's story, where these two fur trappers are out in the wilderness, and this was a story that was retold to Theodore Roosevelt that he put in his book, and he was Roosevelt was, you know, found in the national park system. He was a real wilderness, you know, buff.
Ironically,
right. And you know, one of the trappers was actually killed by a wild man. That's what they're called, also. And Bauman escaped to tell the story. And you know, it made such an impression on Roosevelt that he actually added it to his book.
You wouldn't think a man like that would just add a story that wasn't.
No, not at all. Would not have expected that. And, you know, would have expected that to kind of have been, you know, filtered out over time in history as, you know, as books get edited through every subsequent, you know, re-release of it. So, no, so definitely it comes back to that whole thing, you know, a lot of this phenomena, it's not the crazy person that you would expect, you know, it's respected that you would expect. It's respected people, it's their presidents, their doctors, their, you know, who believe that this is going on. You know, it's not this far-flung idea,
Right.
only held by a few people.
And that's what's great about Sasquatch Chronicles, and you know, that's really the premier podcast in the Bigfoot realm, is that you have judges on there, you have police officers, you have government officials recounting their stories. Like, not too far from where I live, there's a judge who told the story about when he was out jogging on one summer night when he was a teenager. He was approached by a dog man. And
wow.
And I'm super into Dogman. I've not had a Dogman encounter. I don't want to have a Dogman encounter, but I love the Dogman lore.
What do you think Dogman is?
I think Dogman is something completely different. I think it's its own thing.
I mean, origin wise.
Demonic.
Okay.
I suppose. Yeah.
That's funny because you come from a very physical perspective on Bigfoot, but Dogman is less.
I just don't see I just don't see any kind of case for bipedal canids.
Really?
You know?
See, I find it interesting. I think in theory, Dale Russell was a paleontologist. I think he might still be alive, but he has this dinosauroid theory. That is where the Trudon, which was a early dinosaur that was bipedal and very intelligent, similar to a raptor. He believed that it would have eventually evolved into something that was bipedal. So it's interesting to think that maybe at a certain point in creatures' evolutions on this planet, bipedalism might become necessary if you get to a certain point. And, you know, with Dogman, I think there's two different, for me, from a more grounded perspective, I think there's two different theories that might work. One being that you have a snouted ape that just looks more dog-like, like a baboon type creature, and there are sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures that look more like baboons, and so people are just calling something that is a more snouted ape variation a dog man. But also, we know that whales and wolves came from the same original creature. They have a common ancestor that, you know, part of it split off and went into the water. And we know whales are very smart, and we know, you know, and then wolves are wolves, but they communicate similarly. If you think about it, they both had these long calls over long distances, these long howls. So with the intelligence of whales and dolphins and that whole thing, could that common ancestor have continued to evolve into something that was bipedal, if that is a natural path for organisms on this planet through a certain phase of evolution?
That's interesting to think about. That's very interesting.
But look up Dale Russell's work on the Dinosauroid. Another interesting thing about that, if you're into UFOs and aliens, is that the speculative biology piece of it, what they created, that this is what we think this would look like, looks a lot like a gray alien, or also what people sometimes describe as reptilian aliens. So Dale Russell,
you're gonna have to send me some links. I'd love to see it, and share all the links you're gonna share in our little group chat. I want to look at everything you're referencing too. That'd be really fun.
Yeah, no, I would love that. Thank you guys. Yeah, and I will put that out there to anybody who might have watched this or might be watching this in the replay. So thank you so much, guys, for being willing to discuss this with me and answer some of my questions, even though I know some of them might have been a little silly or a little, out there. But I really appreciate you introducing me to this phenomenon. And and just tossing around some of these ideas. It's really opened my mind to a lot, and my mind is completely blown, and really helps me to look at this in a different way. And I will definitely be a little more cautious out in the woods, because like I know where you the region that you live in, Hexn00b. So, and to me, that's mind blowing that you could even find Bigfoot there, so that makes me go, wow, they really are everywhere. I'm not immune just because I live in the New York City area. We're not, immune from this, that we still have to keep our head on a swivel and, take precautions too. So it was really awesome chatting with you guys tonight. Thank you both for staying this long and for answering questions. And and I look forward to exploring this some more. Do you guys have anything to add before we sign off, or?
No, I've had a great time. Thank you, Trey.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Totally
guys
great time.
I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you guys who are watching live and chatting in the chat. And thank you to everybody watching in the replay. So have a wonderful night. Sleep tight. Don't let the Bigfoot bite. I will see you guys next week. Have a good night.
Bye, y'all.
And you guys hang tight for a second.
Oh, sure. Oh, I